This program is made possible by the New York law firm of Zalman and Storman, who specialize in the field of personal injury law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now we introduce our guest and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. It seems like we can't turn on the radio or television or even read a newspaper without being besieged by a litany of stories about murder, rape, shootouts, and bias-related crimes. The management of the office responsible for the arrest and prosecution of those guilty of these crimes seems incomprehensible. Today we'll talk to Charles Hines, the District Attorney of Kings County, and find out what it's like to be the DA for the city's largest borough. Hello, Judge.
Alan,
Joe,
how are you?
Joe, what is it like being the DA of such a massive organization?
Well, I often tell friends it's like being Director of Public Safety in Lebanon. It's a very, very exacting job. We have a multitude of problems which relate directly to the incredible proliferation of drugs and of course, the concomitant proliferation of guns in our streets, which causes the kind of slaughter that should shock ordinary people, but we become desensitized in Brooklyn. For example, in 1991, 821 men, women, and children were shot dead or stabbed to death in Brooklyn. 127 of our kids were shot, 47 died. Last year, we had nearly 700 people murdered, with about 85 kids shot and 37 who died.
It certainly sounds like our streets are not safe anymore.
Well, that's relative. That's a relative word. They're certainly not safe at certain hours of the day and night, depending on what neighborhood you're in. In some neighborhoods, you're clearly not safe day or night. In other areas of the city, you feel relatively safe. Midtown Manhattan, for example, downtown Brooklyn, parts of Queens, and so on. During the day, after hours, you're not safe.
Well, what happens if you're arrested with an unlicensed gun here in New York City?
Well, it depends on what county. In Brooklyn or in Bronx County, your chances of being acquitted of that crime are very, very high, remarkably high. We lose somewhere between 60 and 65% of our gun cases, where the only testimony is a police officer. And the reason for that is there is wholesale nullification by the jury of police officers' testimony. And that in turn has to do very, very directly with the relationship that a lot of people have to police officers. And it's very, very sad, because most cops start their tour of duty not knowing whether they're going to come home to their families, not knowing if they'll be alive at the end of the tour. And yet there are some police officers who are insensitive to citizens, and as a result, they give a bad rap to everyone. So it is a very, very serious problem that has to be addressed. The police department, in the wake of the acquittal in the so-called Yankel Rosenbaum case, where the defendant Limerick Nelson was acquitted, in the wake of that decision by the jury, which seemed to be, from everyone's analysis, a clear case of jury nullification, given the evidence in the case, the police department has had an active relationship with my office, teaching police officers how to testify in a credible way.
What is jury nullification?
It means that a jury rejects that which seems to be a fairly substantial case. And so
self-evident?
Fairly self-evident. I mean, in the case involving Yankel Rosenbaum, 3 different sets of police officers were involved in that case, and the jury would have had to believe, I guess, that these people got together right after the arrest of the defendant and made up a story. Now, you can't retry the case, and I certainly can't professionally talk about the verdict. But anyone looking at the case objectively and looking at the horrendous statistics on gun cases that we have in our county and in Bronx County has got to understand we have a very, very serious problem. It has a lot to do with the fact that that people of color in particular have not had good experience with police officers. We have a lot of instances where, well, I mean, I'll give you the best example. When we have undercover narcotics cases, we do much better for two reasons, I think. I think everyone is afraid of the way neighborhoods are overwhelmed by narcotics, because I think ordinary citizens understand that narcotics lead to a proliferation of guns. We have a much higher conviction rate in undercover sales of narcotics cases. I think also that is due to the fact that many of our police officers who are undercover are African American or Latino. What the police department has got to do in a very aggressive fashion is begin a much more aggressive recruitment program to bring in people of color to the police department so it adequately reflects the diversity of the city.
Let's see if I understand this. You're saying that it appears that in a majority of cases, at least in gun cases,
Yes, gun cases.
majority of gun cases, the juries are finding that the arresting police officers are not credible
That's correct.
or lying.
Not credible. I wouldn't be as strong as lying, but certainly that's not credible. That's correct.
And what is being done now to overcome this?
Well, we're really dealing in a band-aid solution. Our solution is to try and teach police officers the tactics of testifying. I mean, without tailoring testimony, but explaining to them the best way to present themselves when they testify before a jury. But that's Band-Aid. I mean, what has to be done is a massive retraining program in the police department to resensitize our police officers in dealing with, now just let me finish, dealing with the public. Ben Ward, who was an African American police commissioner, said it best. He said, when you're stopped for a speeding ticket on the thruway, the trooper, who may be white, black, or Asian, says, "Sorry, sir, you avoided the speed limit. May I have your license?" Well, I didn't realize. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm going to have to give you a ticket." "I'll be right back, sir." They write the ticket and they give it to them. Our kids, you know, if they get a response from a motorist, there's a confrontation. And as Commissioner Ward said, we've got to teach our young police officers how important it is to be sensitive when they deal with citizens.
Of course, we probably handle 10 times the amount of crimes that the upstate troopers handle.
No question about it. But
and the pressure must be tremendous.
Oh, I think so.
On the law enforcement people here.
But I think your mother and my mother, and even the mothers of most of the police officers would say, that doesn't matter. You're supposed to be
Tell me about the typical makeup of a jury now in York County.
Mostly African American and Latino, majority.
But the county is not mostly.
No, and the problem is that we have a very serious thing happening with our jury selection process. Because of the court facilities, which are a horror, I needn't tell you as a practicing lawyer what they look like. Because of the way in which jurors are treated when they come down to sit in these facilities. Not necessarily by the court personnel, although some could use some sensitivity training also. But the way they're treated, they're put in this large room and they wait around, milling half the day until they're called as a group to go up to a courtroom, and then there's a selection process and so on. And then, some of them may not be selected, they're sent home or they're sent back to the jury room. It is a very impersonal setup, in addition to which the pay for these jurors, if they're not compensated by their employer, is woefully low. The combination of which has sent middle-class potential jurors, black, white, Asian, anyone, away from the system. And what is happening is we get a large percentage of people who are unable to get out of jury service, and many of whom find jury service as an alternative to unsatisfying jobs. They are also the people who are mostly involved with unpleasant experiences with the police department and government in general. So they are very, very cynical about what goes on. And I think it's fairly clear that on the tort side, plaintiffs' lawyers do very, very well against big insurance institutions, just as government does not do well in the prosecutional area, where the only testimony we have is a government agent or a police officer.
Many district attorneys' offices throughout the metropolitan New York area are being criticized because they just don't have that many experienced trial attorneys. How do you answer that?
Well, we have the same problem. We have very, very young lawyers, and we have young lawyers for a lot of reasons, not the least of which the pay scale is not very, very good. Now, what has happened in the last couple of years because of the economy is that lawyers are not leaving DA's offices as quickly as they used to because there are no jobs. And so the longer someone stays, the more experience they get, and their ability to try cases better is enhanced. We have a very, very good training program, but it's from ground zero. And it's a trial advocacy program which is really adapted after my trial advocacy program that I've given at 2 law schools for the last 10 years. It is a very slow process. I've put in place a second seat component where I have experienced lawyers sitting next to a less experienced lawyer to try and train that lawyer on the techniques of trial. So it's an ongoing process. The rate of conviction is beginning to rise slowly. It's been a very, very difficult thing to turn around, but it's starting to rise slowly. And I think it'll get much better. For example, we just had a look at the statistics in the criminal court. We try misdemeanor cases. Over the last 3 months, we've had a dramatic rise in our conviction rate, and our disposition rate is much better.
Now, the district attorney in Bronx County has taken a very strong position on plea bargaining. In fact, I believe in certain crimes, he doesn't even allow plea bargaining. You either plead to the charge or you go to trial.
Right.
What's your position?
My position on crimes of violence and where people are charged with selling narcotics and they can't prove, they can't demonstrate that they're addicts, I take no plea. I give them a sentence that we're satisfied with. If they don't like it, we go to trial. If they're convicted, we look for more time. That's to make room for a very aggressive program we've instituted called the Drug Treatment Alternative to Prison, where I take non-violent drug offenders who are second felony offenders facing 2.5 to 4 years and divert them into drug rehab, which is a very, very long and well thought through structured program, at the end of which time these people who are coming out are trained for a specific job and get a job. They then earn enough money while they're in the reentry period to rent apartments in areas outside of their original neighborhood. We just graduated 28 people from this program. It's the first group of graduates. And for the first time in their lives, 26 of these people are doing what they have not done in any significant time. They're paying taxes. They have full-time jobs. One of them is a full-time college student. The other one is in job training waiting to be placed. What we've done is basically take a system that was overloaded and tried to carve out certain cases that we don't want to plea bargain with at all. But to allow this other program to work, we have to have that as a base.
Why is there plea bargaining?
Plea bargaining is a reality because of the thousands and thousands of cases in the system, and if you didn't have any plea bargaining at all, the system would come to a halt. I mean, you can only try jury trials if you have 40 parts working in the Supreme Court in Kings County. If you're able to try 300 cases a year, it's a lot, because trials are very complicated. They have complicated issues. They take long periods of time.
You have 300 trials you can try a year, and how many if there was no plea bargaining?
If you had no plea bargaining at all, I mean, I don't think you'd try much more than 300 trials a year. So everything else.
How many cases do you plea bargain? In other words.
Oh, we plea bargain hundreds and hundreds of cases. Felony cases.
What about misdemeanor?
Misdemeanor cases, same thing. We have literally thousands of misdemeanor cases that come to the criminal court each year in each county.
Now, it was reported in Kings County that one judge refused to take a plea bargain where she felt that the proposed sentence for that particular defendant was insufficient. What's your comment on that?
If that's Judge Miller, I think Judge Miller has such a reverence for the truth that she has difficulty using it. I'm not aware of any other judge other than her would say something so bizarre.
And how do you answer that?
I think if it was Judge Miller, it was a bizarre thing for her to say because it doesn't happen. I can't imagine any other judge saying it. But I have this particular judge who's unhappy with the Brooklyn Supreme Court, and I wish that somehow she'd range for a transfer, but I'm stuck with her.
Now, there was an article reported, again, with this particular judge, that she dismissed a particular case that your office had brought before her due to some sort of clerical error where the defendant was lost within the system. Can you tell us about that?
That was a fact. It happens. We have so many cases that we make mistakes. It's a fallible system. And so I have no objection to her comments about that. I mean, I might object to the way in which she comments. You know, she has as I say, she has a particular dislike of my office and the Kings County Supreme Court. And I'm stuck with her. I wish she would leave, but there's no place to put her, I guess.
What's your general feeling for the state of the judiciary and the whole court system now?
For the most part, I think we have very, very hard-working judges. They have not received a pay raise since 1987. I think that's an outrage. They're finally going to get some increase in their salaries. I think for the most part they work very, very hard. You know, as do the lawyers in the system, whether the defense lawyers or the prosecutors.
And I'm going to ask you, we're going to take a break now,
Sure.
but think about what the state of the criminal justice system.
Sure.
You're watching Lawline. I'm here with District Attorney Charles Hines. Stay with us.
After dating the guy forever, you think I could tell him anything. Why is this so hard? I'm really scared.
It takes a lot of guts to tell someone he's too drunk to drive. But you can do it. Just say it. Because if you don't, there may be nothing left to say.
Kevin, I'm gonna drive.
Take the keys, call a cab, take a stand. Friends don't let friends drive drunk.
When your employees train with the National Guard and Reserve, they learn to be better team players, better decision makers, and better leaders. It's training that makes them better at serving our country. And better when they come back to work for you.
Bill's back.
Be a hero. Give your employees the freedom to protect ours.
Hello, you're watching Lawline. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. Today's guest is Charles Hines, District Attorney of Brooklyn, which is Kings County, one of the largest counties in the state of New York.
The largest.
The largest. Before the break, I'd asked you to give us just a synopsis of what the status is of the criminal justice system.
It's in very, very bad shape. It's at times frozen because of the amount of cases. It's frozen also because of a failed drug policy that has tortured the system for 12 to 15 years, a policy that says there's a law enforcement solution to all of the crimes that are committed in the criminal justice or in the city, and that can be handled by the criminal justice system. And when you deal with the reality that 15 years ago, maybe 15 to 20% of all of the cases processed in New York City's criminal justice system was drug-related, and now it's over 80%. And if your only answer is to take sick people, nonviolent drug addicts, and throw them into prisons, and keep throwing them into prisons until they get out to go back to the same neighborhood to commit the same crime for drugs and go back to the same prison until they die, then you don't have a policy. And so as a result, with all of those cases clogging up the system, we at times are at a standstill. So we have to prioritize. We have to at times cut and paste. We have to at times, seem to be endlessly catching up to the system. It's not the way to run the system. There is a much more efficient way to do it, and that's what we're trying to do in my office. And our direction is multifaceted. We've taken the county, which is 70 square miles with 2.5 million people, and we've broken it up into 5 geographic zones. Every felony that's committed in a particular zone is tried by a bureau assigned to that zone. And so the benefit is that we are dealing with the problems of 400,000 to 500,000 people in 10 to 15 square miles. We get to know the community leaders, the religious and educational leaders, the precinct commanders in the zones. We work with them on prioritizing particular reaction to crime. In addition, we have this drug treatment alternative to prison to try and reduce the glut in the system. 100 drug addicts commit 10 crimes a week. That's 50,000 crimes a year. If you can take them out of the system for a year, you reduce criminal activity by that.
Is that unique to your county?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And is it being tried in any other counties?
It's going to be attempted in Manhattan as well as New York County. And I suspect it's going to spread to other parts of urban America.
If I gave you the power of the legislature, the power of the executive, and the power of the purse, what would you do to change the system?
I would spend a lot more money on drug treatment alternatives drug rehabilitation, and education. I would take the cut of the criminal justice budget and put a substantial amount into drug treatment, alternatives, and education, and a less of a percentage into law enforcement. And what I would do is I would fine-tune law enforcement by doing that. We get no benefit in Brooklyn that in 1975 we had 120 assistant district attorneys and we now have 595. There's no benefit to New York City that in 1975 there were 600 assistant DAs in all of the 5 DAs' offices. And when I took
Throughout
office,
New York City.
That's right. When I took office on January 1st, 1990, there were 1,533 assistants. There isn't a man or woman or child watching this program who feels safer for all those additional ADAs or additional cops or additional jail sentences. So we have to have a rational approach which says very simply, you commit a crime of violence, we're going to make your punishment certain. No plea bargain, you go to jail, you don't pass go. If you sell drugs and you're not an addict, the same thing. If you're a career criminal, I don't care what crime you commit, you're going to go to jail. But we are going to take the drug addicts out of the system. That way we will substantially reduce the prison population and we will have the money that we have put down the rat hole to put into other programs.
But then the laws have to be almost ironclad. I remember years ago there was a lot of publicity with the law is if you get caught with a gun in New York City, you're going to jail. Does that happen?
No, because the law was written with an intentional loophole. The law says right now that if a judge finds mitigating circumstances, they don't have to impose the year sentence. By the way, I'm not a fan of mandatory minimum sentencing. I think that we don't pay judges enough money, but we pay them a lot of money as it is now, and I hope they get more money with a raise. But they ought to have some discretion. They ought to be able to exercise discretion. We don't need automatons who look at charts. I think what the sentencing guideline system in the federal court has done is become an abomination. We take intelligent judges who are on the bench for because they are the best and the brightest from law firms and litigation practices, and we put them into a room and we give them a chart and we say this is what you have to give a convicted defendant. That's ridiculous. I think judges ought to have discretion. We ought to pay the judges enough money, and we ought to let them have discretion.
How are judges selected for these high-profile cases, which in your county I see periodically?
They're selected by the Office of Court
Has nothing to do with the district attorney's office?
No, I have no control over that.
And how do you handle these high-profile cases? Do you handle them differently?
Oh yeah, I have a trial unit called the trial cadre, and it's made up of the senior lawyers in the office. We have some superb trial lawyers. Some of them were formerly with the Homicide Bureau. Others had come from private practice. And they are people with a minimum of 10 years experience on average, and they're the best and the brightest we have. And we have a lot of high-profile cases, and they handle them in a superb way, I believe.
Are you satisfied with the sentences that are being rendered by at least Kings County judges?
I think, by and large, the judges do a very credible job in sentencing. Sentencing is the most difficult thing a judge has to do. And while I disagree with some of the sentences, you never see me disagree publicly. And I'm not the kind of person who takes on judges unnecessarily. I don't sit back, as a potted plant when someone attacks me. But I certainly have no reason to have any second guessing about the sentences of judges in the Brooklyn Supreme Court.
Of course, I've read articles where defense attorneys will actually try to judge shop, where they feel one judge for one particular crime may give one sentence, and the same crime, the same defendant, another judge maybe give a year less or 2 years less.
Well, that used to be a great tradition. We have much more structured setup in our Supreme Court now. The assignments of judges are now based on assignments which coincide with the zone prosecution, as I described it. When we broke up the borough into the various zones, judges were assigned to handle cases that came from those zones. So it's really very much the luck of the draw, as it ought to be, I think.
What can you tell the public? What should the public be doing to make your job easier?
They should be lobbying for me with every elected official that they deal with, and get elected officials to understand that they know that what Michael Levine, a DEA agent, drug enforcement agent, said in a Times op-ed piece some months ago, that we have spent $100 billion and put it down a rat hole. That what Michael Levine said was we've got to put more money into drug treatment and education. I would hope that anybody watching this show who is faced with an elected official who tells them there's a law enforcement solution to the problems of drugs or bigotry or anything else that tears us up as a society, that the people listening to that person stop listening because they're being treated as fools. The public has got to lobby the legislative leadership and the executive to put more money into fine-tuning this criminal justice system, to take drug addicts out of the system, and to treat them as a public health crisis, because that's what they are.
Do you feel that, well, in your county, what percentage of crimes are being committed by drug addicts?
It's more than 80% of the crimes processed in Brooklyn are drug-related, which means there are people who are drug addicts or people who are drug abusers. Now, as to those people who commit crimes of violence on drugs, I have no brief for them. They have no place for me, as far as I'm concerned, in any drug treatment alternative. They should be dealt with very, very aggressively. But there's a huge percentage, 40 to 45% of the people committing nonviolent crimes in the county who are hardcore drug users who could be rehabilitated.
Now, a few years ago, there was talk about community courts. Was that instituted?
No, we have been lobbying for a community court in Kings County for 2.5 years, and I hope that the new Chief Judge, Judith Kay, who I have a great regard for and a great deal of respect for, as I did the former Chief Judge, Judge Wackler. I hope that Judge Kay will think about putting a community court in one of our zones in the Brooklyn area.
And what kind of crimes or charges would you like seen in those particular community
Well, I think
courts?
at the beginning we should have low-level crimes, misdemeanors and violations.
Nonviolent crimes?
Yeah, nonviolent, to allow
prostitution,
gambling? To allow the public to see how the system operates. And then as they become more conversant with it and more familiar with it, then we can begin to put felony cases, nonviolent felony cases into the system.
What happens now in the system of murders and rapes and tremendous assaults with these nonviolent crimes, with the gambling crimes, with the drunk driving crimes? I mean, that's violent, but with the lesser crimes, what's been happening?
That's what's happened is there has been such a suppression from the top because of the level of violence in Brooklyn and other parts of the urban centers of America that people become desensitized. And people don't get quite excited about anything as you know, still excites me. As someone walks up to another human being and smacks him in the nose, full blast, and that fellow or the woman begins to bleed. I don't think that should be handled as a harassment charge, a violation, and handled as a community service. I think someone who does that, to me, that's a real crime of violence. That person ought to spend some time in jail, a day, 5 days, whatever it is, so they get the message. You can't hurt someone that way and get away with it. There has to be a reordering of our priorities in the way in which we legislate as well in these crimes of
Joe,
violence.
in the moment we have left, I remember a few years ago I was seeing Joe Hines for mayor. What's the status of that?
Joe Hines is running for re-election as Brooklyn District Attorney, and I hope to win in November.
Thank you very much for appearing on Lawline.
Thank you.
And as always, this is Alan Schnorman, and thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. This program is made possible by the New York law firm of Zollman and Schnorman, who specialize in the field of personal injury law, located at 63 Wall Street in New York City.